Now, it's easy for those of us lucky enough not to live in the northeast, the northwest, or north-central Nigeria, the epicenters of Islamist militancy, banditry, and herder-farmer attacks, and some say Christian genocide, for our attention to wander, especially when the guns are too far away to be heard in major cities like Abuja and Lagos. But we're going to begin this program by looking back at how insecurity in these regions exploded in 2025 and the ordeal for people in the Northeast, for instance, who've lived with an Islamist insurgency since 2009, with many of them now crammed into IDP camps, camps that have since spread into the northwest and north central regions. And with it came a new peril in 2025, attacks on schools, mass abductions of school children, and summary executions of military officers by militants as insecurity surged along the entire northern axis. And amid all that, there was, of course, the inimitable Donald Trump ordering the Pentagon to begin planning for action in Nigeria and threatening to go into this country guns a-blazing over attacks on Christians. As the old year ends and the new year approaches, those are two issues that are still with us, but that we desperately wish weren't. Two grim notes to end 2025 on. A volatile Donald Trump and his allegation of systematic violations of religious freedom in this country, and raging militants supported by maniacal bandits who seem to have the extraordinary capability of continuing to survive 16 years after the Boko Haram insurgency began. Well, watching all this, our distinguished panel of expert analysts with whom we'll look back at the seminal events that have shaped 2025 in Nigeria. And joining me in the studio as we attempt to weave together the strands of that pivotal year are the Professor of Political Science and Chair of the Editorial Board of Nigeria's Premium Times newspaper, Professor Ibrahim, who's a noted sophologist and Senior Fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development, the political analyst and executive director of Development Specs Academy, Professor Ikechukwu, who's a member of the editorial board of This Day newspaper and is also a professor of strategic management and human capital development, and the political and current affairs analyst and professor of communications at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Adeniyi. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me come to you first, Professor Ibrahim. As the old year approaches its end, two issues are still with us. As I mentioned at the outset, we desperately wish they were not. Two grim notes to end 2025 on. The first, of course, insecurity. Lots of developments there, abductions, staggering numbers of deaths, extraordinary capability of ragtag militants to survive 16 years after the insurgency began. Let's start with your thoughts and assessment of that.
I think it's been a very difficult year for Nigerians, but the fact of the matter is that many of the preceding years have been equally difficult on Nigerians. But I think what marks this year is the glaring inability, or some would say unwillingness, of the Nigerian state to carry out its constitutional responsibility of providing for the security and welfare of Nigerians. Since 2009, how do we explain the fact that each year insecurity continues to grow and the number of people, civilians with arms, using these arms against communities, against road users, against even the military and the police themselves, clearly indicates a sustained lack of effort on the part of the Nigerian state to carry out its constitutional responsibility. The fact of the matter is that once you have people who have no rights to arms, procuring arms, and then finding out they could use those arms with impunity, that problem is bound to increase. We have had many moments of hope that the tide will turn. When Buhari came, many of us felt the tide will turn. This is a tough general. He will deal with them. He did nothing of that. He proved totally incapable of doing that. People like the current president, who had before criticized the Jonathan administration for school abductions and rising insecurity, today find themselves at the helm of the state and performing worse than Jonathan did at their time. So it's a very sad tale. The narrative is extremely disturbing, and the problem we all face as Nigerians is that we are yet to see a government that has both the will, the determination, and the know-how to attack this problem of rising insecurity.
And Professor Ikechukwu, as Professor Ibrahim said there, a sad tale. Is it also a sad tale for you? What is your assessment of how insecurity unfolded in this country in 2025?
Well, 2025 appeared to some extent to mark what might be described as the highest expressions of the challenges that followed Boko Haram's arrival in 2009. If we take ourselves back to begin the evaluation from 2009, what you're likely to see is what appears to be a continuously receding state. More spaces have been taken in those years. There are local governments today in Nigeria that have been under bandit control for months and in some cases years, citing Katsina and a few others. There are also communities that no longer exist as communities because they've vacated their lands. They've been in refugee camps for years now. They can't go back there easily. If they're going to go back, you have to take time to reclaim the land because re-desertification has taken place. Now, schools are being shut down in order to protect the children. That's one of the worst indications of a receding state. You live in an address, it's your house, you paid for it. Some people come and push the fence, you move the fence back. They keep taking the space until the fence is just in front of your exit door. That's what's been happening. And the more disturbing challenge is the possibility and general suspicion, which is difficult not to share, that there appears to be some level of complicity. We've just rescued some abducted schoolgirls in Kebbi. Everybody is celebrating it. They all came out in good health. Question number one, who was arrested for that abduction? Nobody. And you find more and more of such cases, and you find counter-narratives. Oh, we use non-kinetic methods. You can speak all the grammar you know, but there are two issues. If you could meet bandits and rescue your children from them, and we're celebrating the separation, you haven't answered the question why those bandits are in your compound. If you could also have the Minister of Defense, who would say that, you know, those forests are too thick to go and bomb. And you have his deputy who will tell you on national television that, you see, you must know that not all bandits are criminals. That's a serving officer of the Federal Republic of the Nigeria at the ministerial level, that, you know, not all of them are criminals. What's the meaning of the word bandit? So when you hear statements like that, and when you discover that bandits can actually do almost anything they like, and it goes on, you begin to ask yourself, it is impossible for me to say that the presidency is encouraging this. But it is also possible for me to say that there are people, very well-placed people in government, not in sync with the interests of the Nigerian state, but who are determined to drive this narrative. And the core challenge is the question they are not asking themselves. Who is benefiting? They are killing Muslims, they are killing Fulanis, they are killing everybody in sight, and the question is, are these really Fulanis? Right. You see them wear earrings. Our Fulanis don't wear earrings. They take over farmlands all over the place. So the critical issue on the table is that the Nigerian state is on the brink of not being able to define itself anymore, except the matter of insecurity is summarily dealt with.
Prof, thank you for that. And let me come to you, Professor Adeniyi, as we assess the weight of these challenges. President Tinubu has, of course, internally changed his Minister of Defense, appointing Christopher Musa as the new minister. Does that signal to you fundamental change in the administration's approach to battling insecurity?
I think it looks reasonable. It looks strategic, considering the experience of the general. You know, he was chief of defense staff, and of course, he's been very experienced in the war front, fighting Boko Haram and other forms of insecurity. And most importantly, he has a kind of a background that endears him to the people and the populace as well, and even the rank and file of the military, from what we saw after his appointment. But it goes beyond his personality, Charles. You know, there are so many issues conflicting in creating the situation that we have that has become very difficult, and even much more so in recent time. Remember that the crisis of the insecurity began from ideological warfare to economic. And when it becomes economic, you know, it can have the kind of domino effect that we are seeing now, such that our life is indirectly being dictated by bandits, by criminals. We are now subtly afraid of them. We are scared of the roads. We rather want to fly. And of course, we mind where we live and where we go to. And a lot of people, particularly the elites, are also thinking of Plan B, imagining that the state will eventually collapse, God forbid. You know, so that's the point at which we are, and that's the point at which the general was appointed as Chief of Defense Staff. So I'm a Chief of, what do you call it, Minister of Defense. So he has a lot on his shoulder. Like I always like to say, what we need to do at this time is probably just to reinvest our hope in him, you know, in the build-up to the new year. Imagining that 2026 can be better than 2025, which didn't really offer us anything good, even though it is a routine periodization of life's trajectory, as the case could be, Charles.
It is for this country to give everybody no reason to think that has a problem they should come here to solve for us. That's actually what appears to be missing. And that's why also, if you notice, the government very quickly responded and gave, tried to explain, to give some counter-narratives. But for as long as there's justification for the suspicion, even if not the fact, for the suspicion of genocide, for the suspicion of unfair treatment, for the suspicion of growing insecurity, because we must ask ourselves, how come that after Trump's threat, the rate of kidnapping quadrupled, the active suddenly became active, abductions increased? These are statistical facts. Two things might be happening. Either those supporting insecurity are pushing it, or we're being set up by being made to look even more insecure. At least in the last 1 month, it's been quite bad.
Okay. Well, let me come to you, Professor Adeniyi, because the writer Farouk Pierogi makes the point that the shake-up of Nigeria's security structure and the seeming renewed earnestness in fighting the criminals that are killing Nigerians are clearly the product of American pressures on President Tinubu. And he says that our instinct for freedom from needless death is way stronger than our pride, and that anyone who truly saves Nigerian Christians from alleged genocide will inevitably also be saving Nigerian Muslims. What are your thoughts on that, briefly, before we go on a break?
Yeah, Charles, I think first I agree with the Prof that we have had a renewed increased attempt to deal with this insecurity after the Donald Trump threats, you know. And secondly, we also know, like as Professor Ikechukwu has said, you know, that if Trump, for instance, comes into Nigeria, there's going to be, you know, beyond the collateral effect, there's going to be a ripple effect on whoever he thinks he's going to attack, because Nigeria is such a complex country that things can snowball and even degenerate. And of course, the kind of help that he thought he was coming to do, he will not realize it. And of course, history has shown that there's no way America has gone to in the past that that country has remained the same. We do not want Nigeria to be one of such countries. And of course, what more do we have to say again? I think it's also very important to say that Nigeria has actually reacted very well, to the threat. We have not just ramped up efforts in dealing with insecurity, but we have also engaged them. We've been very, very diplomatic in engaging them. We've been there. We have a US-Nigeria working group. The optics are looking good, even though there is still much to be done. But again, we can also say it's somewhat shameful that we had to have this kind of threat before we ramp up efforts. So what it means is that there's a lot more that can still be done. We still have a lot of capacity, to deal with this threat, where this capacity? The determination, the political will of our leaders, to move in without minding whose ox is God, because there are allegations, justifiable, valid allegations that there are complicities even in high places. Where are we scared of dealing with these culprits, however high they might be. 2009 up to now, from 2009 up to 2025, is so long a time for a nation as strong as Nigeria, not to be able to deal with insurgency, banditry, kidnapping, as the case could be, Charles.
Okay, Prof, thanks very much indeed. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our analysis of 2025 in this special year-ender edition of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Enyegolo, and this is a special year-ender. Now, 2025 was the year the political chessboard in Nigeria shifted dramatically, with high-profile defections bolstering the ruling APC and crippling the opposition PDP. As power consolidated in the APC, alarm bells rang out at the number and weight of the defections, as many prominent politicians from the PDP and Labour, including governors and lawmakers, abandoned their parties, citing internal crises, personal ambitions, and alignment with the federal government's agenda. As the opposition weakened, concern grew about the erosion of democratic institutions, authoritarian tendencies, and the potential emergence of a one-party state. It's a political tightrope, isn't it? One that's earned 2025 the title of the year of defections and diminishing opposition. The defections have sparked heated debates about political survival, power struggles, and the commodification of politics. With the House of Representatives considering constitutional amendments to curb defections, Nigeria stands at a crossroads, balancing the need for stability with the imperative of preserving democratic values. As the nation navigates this treacherous terrain, one question lingers. What's next for Nigeria's fragile democracy? What's it going to look like in 2026? And with me to continue our assessment of the year that was and the year that is to come are our guest analysts, the Professor of Political Science and Chair of the Editorial Board of Nigeria's Premium Times newspaper, Professor Ibrahim, who's also a noted psephologist and Senior Fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development. The Political Analyst and Executive Director of Development Specs Academy, Professor Ikechukwu, who's a member of the Editorial Board of This Day newspaper and is also a Professor of Strategic Management and Human Capital Development, and the Political and Current Affairs Analyst and Professor of Communications at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Adeniyi. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Professor Ibrahim, will Nigeria's democracy succumb to one-party dominance in 2026?
Well, in the history of this country, we've never had one-party dominance. The political tradition in Nigeria is two-party dominance, established during the First Republic when all the parties coalesced into two formations: APGA, the All Progressive Grand Alliance, and NNA, New Nigerian Alliance. And this was reproduced in the Second Republic. The Third Republic never caught on. And in the Fourth Republic at this time, we are seeing this concerted effort to eliminate the opposition, essentially using threats of prosecution and of economic consequences and inducement, essentially, of financial resources and possibility of more access to power. Any democracy that tries to eliminate the opposition is undermining the political system, and it's always a very bad sign. We've just had an attempted coup in Benin Republic precisely because the president of that country used the judiciary and the election commission to eliminate opposition parties from contesting elections, both the previous parliamentary elections and the presidential elections coming up in February next year. When people feel that the democratic gates are closed, then desperation comes in, anger and frustration builds up. Those advising the ruling regime in this country to engage in this pursuit of the elimination of opposition are giving them very bad advice. It won't all go well for democracy. It won't do something good for the future of this country. And I think it is important that they listen to wise counsel and allow the game to be played. And for the game to be played, you need a level playing ground. What they are doing now is eliminating the level playing ground.
Indeed. And Professor Ikechukwu, is it your sense that these defections are eroding public trust in politicians and democratic institutions, and there are clearly public concerns about authoritarian tendencies and possibly reduced accountability?
Now, to speak of reducing public trust is to suggest that the trust is there. It is not, in my view. So there's no trust being reviewed. A substantial percentage of those in office are believed not to have gotten into office by winning elections, the way elections are won. Their conduct has not suggested that they are using public funds properly. And we're not talking about political parties, we're talking about people in leadership. And so if you want to stretch it, I'm even half inclined to suggest that there are no defections. If you look at the composition of the PDP, of the APC today, you ask yourself, how many prominent people in the APC were not prominent members of the PDP? So it's the same political class, the same political elite, moving from one platform to the other in order to maintain their control on the Nigerian state. But let's assume that the defections are real. Is defection wrong or natural? Can somebody's conviction change? The answer is yes. You can convert to a new religion. So assuming the ideology of one party suddenly makes more sense to you, you're justified in going for it. But my take is that there are no defections. They all have the same common aspiration to get hold of Nigeria. They all also, at the end of the day, have the same kind of problems, which is challenge with the authorities about transparency and corruption. So people, I believe, some, not all, are looking for platforms that will offer them three things: protection, access to the resources of the state, and continuous dominance by living at the expense of the state. Not about governance, not about leadership.
Well, thank you for that. And Professor Adeniyi, I mean, there is, as we mentioned, I mean, there's been tremendous erosion of the, if you like, the space occupied by the PDP and the likes of the Labour Party. But then there is the ADC, which claims that it's come out from the ashes as some kind of a phoenix, and that it is made up of committed Nigerian citizens who are going to change this Nigerian world in 2026 and 2027. Are you convinced that in the midst of all this other, if you like, crushing of the opposition, they can soar above the rest?
Yeah, Charles, if I'm not distracted, I've been distracted all evening here anyway, but I just hope that I won't be distracted anymore. But what is important really, I'm not really worried about, the political movements. the migration from one party to the other, because we know that our political system is one that is bereft of ideology in the first instance. Most political parties are just special purpose vehicles for individuals to make their way to political power, as the case could be. So it doesn't really matter to me, even though I know the importance of having a multi-party democracy. Why I won't worry is the fact that even as it is now, we still have very strong individuals that we can easily refer to as civil society individuals whose voices are still very strong. They still offer purposeful alternative views. They are still challenging the hegemony of the APC, as the case could be. And of course, we also have a very robust media, irrespective of threats. And we also have the civil society that is still as in their groupings, and they are still very, very active. So, again, what about the fact of a party, however powerful, imploding? We have seen situations where parties have imploded, irrespective of how huge they might be. Of course, if the more you allow people into your midst, the more there will be contradictions, and the more there could be conflict as well. And if there are perpetual conflicts, of course, there will not be peace. So it's not necessarily correct to say that parties might be gratifying themselves by welcoming people. It might be a disadvantage at the end of the day. But even if it is not, I will still take solace in the fact, I'm still comforted, by the fact that the system is huge enough to produce shades of counter points, counter narratives, to the dominant narrative that the ruling party might want to portray, as the case could be, Charles. But again, going forward into 2026, I think we should also be mindful of how we are characterized as a people. Over the years, Nigeria is characterized as a country where citizens are essentially resilient. And we know how other nations are easily characterized. If you talk about America, of course, you remember freedom, prosperity. If you talk about the United Kingdom, you remember welfareism tradition. China, you remember hard work and prosperity. Japan, respect, tradition, and hard work. France, style. But when you come to Nigeria, it's about resilience. Resilience in what regard? With respect to how we are only able to tolerate sufferings, cheating by leaders. At what point do we want to change the narrative such that our resilience will be one that is purposeful, that is positive, that will take us to the destination that we ordinarily want to be as a nation. Right. 2026 is another year for us to redefine ourselves, being an election year in the build-up to the proper election year that 2027 actually is.
Prof, thank you very much. You made quite a lot of sense there. Let me just mention very quickly before we move on that the House of Representatives is considering a constitutional amendment to address political defections, aiming to make it mandatory for defecting officials to resign and seek re-election. We'll have to see how far that goes. But just moving on, in the dying minutes of this program, amid all the preparations for the turkey and the trimmings as the festive season evolves and we prepare to celebrate Christmas with the new year steadily advancing upon us, let's search for some nuggets of positivity, because amidst the darkness there have been small glimpses of hope, with cautiously optimistic economic indicators, ongoing government reforms and social development initiatives sparking an almost invisibly tiny sense of optimism amongst Nigerians. And let me ask you, Professor Ibrahim, what is the glimmer of hope that you see or that you rather saw in 2025 that made you optimistic going into 2026?
I think maybe the important thing about this year is that when the president came into power in 2023 and took those two policy turns, one on the Naira, letting it float, and the other cutting subsidies, we had a situation in which the rate of the dollar was changing virtually by the day, and prices in the market were changing by the day, and that really created a terrible situation that created alarm, but above all, suffering and misery in the country. I think there has been some stabilization in terms of the monetary and economic system. I think the fact that Dangote refinery came up was an important turning point for the country, because fuel supply from a local source has now become the dominant factor in the economy. So these are, I think, important things. But the fact of the matter is that the cost of living crisis has not abated. It's still a very tough situation because workers' incomes have not increased, and therefore the suffering and the misery continues, even if there has been some rebate.
Right, so it's a qualified sort of hope there. Professor Ikechukwu, for you, was there anything to crow about in a hopeful sense in 2025, as briefly as you can?
Yes, I think so. You know, when suffering becomes so terrible, people begin to ask themselves, are there things we should do differently? I think that things have become so bad that is likely to lead to a new mindset. But as for what is going to happen, being the result of some resolute policy drive and all of that, no, we are coming to a place. One of the good things I've seen, in spite of all the bad news, the most credible explanation that has been coming from government has actually been coming from the Minister of Information. So if anything, I think one of the good things that come out this year is that the presidency should now be in a position at the end of this year to ask itself, should we run a proper Minister of Information, or should we gather all manner of people called spokespersons for one thing or the other who practically damage the image of government?
Okay.
They may have to weed out all those people, with all due respect.
Okay, and very, very briefly, Professor Adeniyi, a final word from you. Do you see any hope? Did you see hope in 2025 and going into 2026?
Yeah, I see hope in the economy and making a rebound. In the last quarter of 2025, we have had how the GDP has increased slightly. And of course, I've also heard the predictions of economists, among them Bismarck Rewani, foremost economist. And of course, I read his predictions that 2026 is actually looking good. And looking at the analysis, it looks plausible. And again, how about the area of defense? We have a new sheriff in town. We have a new minister who looks promising. And looking at all that together, we should just hope that 2026 will be a better year than 2025 is.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for keeping that brief, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, and of course before him, Professor Ikechukwu, and as well as Professor Ibrahim. Thank you very much indeed. So as we get closer to bidding farewell to 2025, it's clear that Nigeria has faced significant challenges, but the hope must be that it's also taking steps towards a brighter future. The Nigerian government has shown some commitment to addressing insecurity, with some successes in intelligence-led operations and regional security coordination efforts. Economic reforms, though challenging, may well be poised to begin to yield results. There might even be improved infrastructure and investments in key sectors. But still, the journey ahead is long and arduous, though there is a sense of resilience and determination among Nigerians. As the country looks towards 2026, it's clear that the path to stability and prosperity will require continued efforts, collaboration, and hope. Bye for now.